Afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us back here. My name is Ted Galante, and I'm going to thank you. That's really helpful. I'm going to pick up sort of where we left off. We are looking at the Orleans campus plan, trying to sort out the property that is in this air photo here on Eldridge Parkway, and we have been through some existing site review and some previous study review. This is sort of a recap of what we talked about last time. Conceptual building program development and conceptual building footprints. And then we talked about the next steps being site planning and cost projections and things like that. And so today we want to talk to you about the proposed site options as we've been developing them with the working group, sort of a master plan schedule in terms of immediate next steps, and then some cost projections. And I want to reinforce the word projections on what we see for those items that we talk about this afternoon that are very far in the future, because they are projections, right? We love to think we have a crystal ball. We have a crystal ball that we can see a year or two into the future. Seeing 5, 7, years into the future gets a little bit trickier. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then our next steps would be a summary report. I think our summary report is due April 1st in that zone. And so where what we had talked about last is that we have some proposed building footprints. Pardon my voice is a little scratchy today. Proposed building footprints off to the side with fire rescue building here, community center building here, the possibility of a 2-story school building, the possibility of a single-story school building, both of those being candidates for discussion as this moves forward. We know that this is our property, right, that we're working with. This is the existing 2-story fire station. This is the existing single-story school building. And then the fields and parking and everything around the perimeter out to Eldridge Parkway, Clayton Circle, and this is the easement that would allow us to get into the site should we choose to use that. It certainly would work for a number of different things. So those are sort of the puzzle pieces that we were working with, and we're going to talk to you. And we tried to put this in a little bit of a pre-summary slide as we go through some of the options, just to not confuse it. There's really 2 options here: option 1A and 1B. There's a slight differentiation in those options, and there's option 2A and 2B, and there's a slight differentiation in those options. We've studied a number of options. These are the ones that we're recommending that come strongest to the fore, and we'll talk about why that is. So if I go into option 1, we have Eldridge Parkway across the front, the 4 privately owned parcels that are along Eldridge Parkway, and we have fire in this lower right-hand quadrant of the site, as we would say, with a proposed new facility at that location, deploying probably out in this direction toward Eldridge Parkway and returning in this direction, or deploying smaller vehicles down in that direction. You see some pink rectangles around the building. Those are parking. This is an outbuilding for some storage. So that's sort of the overall layout of parking. You can see that the existing parking is roughly 30. We have proposed parking for about 50. Up in the rear of the site, at the top of the site, we have the community center proposed up in here with about a parking for 59 up in there. And then the school building wrapping around the corner here, changing from roughly 82 parking spaces to 125 parking spaces. The parking spaces are a little fungible. That's what's put into the document now, but those can be modified as need be. Fields, playgrounds, all laid out in different ways. And just so you understand the graphic, this is the pond in the back, and these are wetlands setbacks that are off the pond in the back. So we want to just mention that. this starts to illustrate, and I'm sorry, I didn't say, but I'll make it clear now. You'll see a number 1 on fire, number 2 on school, number 3 on community center. That is a phasing guide, right? So we may phase the projects in that order. And so the existing fire department multiple story building here, this is the proposed location. It's behind fire. We don't have to displace these folks working out of there. We will impact them. It will impinge their site a bit. It will be harder for them to do their job, but we'll be able to get the building built, switch them over there, and then regrade the front of that site and take down the building to allow them to operate very well out of there. I'll mention here that there was a discussion by a couple of topics. I'll try and bring up topics that we talked about last time as I remember them, but we talked about the question of reusing some of the existing building. We took another look at that, and there's really no way to get that to work in a feasible way that allows you to have a fire station that lasts for 50 years. And it's just an unfortunate scenario as to how this building is located and situated and such. So phase 1, we build a fire station, modify the school entrance road, modify the grading and the road that's along here to get out to Eldridge. And that's all within, so let me just make this statement. All of the work that we're proposing is on town-owned land. We are not purchasing any of the adjacent properties right now in these proposals. So phase 1, that gets built. Phase 2, the reason the building was, and you may remember this from the conversation last, the reason the building was sort of crescent shaped and really modular is it allows us to fit it behind the existing school building, right? So phase 1 is up and running. Phase 2, the school can stay there, and phase 2 building gets built with the school operational. It will be tight and impinge on the school. There's no question. Construction, as we all know, can be noisy and messy, but it's something we have to live with, whether it's on the highway or in our neighbor's property. So a building can be built there. We can get that all set up fairly well. Some site development would probably be temporary site development in different places until we take this existing building down and then finalize the site development in that area for parking and what have you. Third phase would be a little easier for everyone. There would still be construction traffic and access, but it would allow us to build a community center that's up in this portion of the property and reconfigure the fields and playground and things in and around that area. So that's option 1A. There's a list of pros and cons that are in the book that we handed out. I don't know that I'm going to read them all now, but there are many more pros than there are cons, and we felt that this was a strong candidate for approval for this overall study for this location. There was a discussion about the possibility and consideration for generating power in some way on site, some sort of green power generation. And while this is really just an illustration, it's a way of saying that all of the buildings can have photovoltaic panels on them as they run around and be somewhat self-sufficient. We're in the Northeast, so they can't be completely self-sufficient, but we can generate a fair amount of electricity. And in fact, we took the liberty of putting a solar canopy on top of the parking area that we're talking about in the middle of the area. So we'd like to get photovoltaic panels built into the project at some point. The current building code under which the fire department, fire rescue building would be built under requires that buildings are photovoltaic panel ready. It's not required that photovoltaics are on there, but they need to be ready by the state building code. I can't predict what the codes will say when we are building these other items, but I don't think photovoltaics are going away. And so that's something that we wanted to just reinforce, that we heard your comments, and we're trying to incorporate those things. So that was option 1. And And really, if your eye is sharp, just focus on this piece of the site for 1 second, because as I flip to option 1B, you'll notice that these two buildings merge. You see that little spot right there is trying to make a shared amenity between the two buildings. The school has a need for various physical education resources. The community center would have a need for physical education resources. One check as we're going through this, one stone that we didn't want to leave unturned, was the possibility of combining, having some combined program where those two buildings, it becomes one longer building, but they share a program area. This is very similar. 1B is very similar to 1A. All the things that I just covered are the same, other than that connection. So I have parking around fire, there's parking around the school, and parking for a community center. They're all individually operated and supported. There are questions about the integration of program or the separation of program and security and keeping children safe and all sorts of things that we want to think about. But that's one of the pieces of the puzzle. Everything else being similar. The fire can go first, school can go second, community can go third. Maybe it's an extension of the school. Maybe it's all number two. It all travels at the same time. That's something that we'd have to think about as we go forward. Pros and cons are very similar. I think we added direct access to the school and community center as a connected building. But the school committee, this is something that we need to think about, right? Some one piece that we need to think about in the overall puzzle. Photovoltaic panels, of course, the same as in all the other areas, in all the other concepts. So that's really option 1 in 2 versions, 1A and 1B.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Could you just go back, please, a couple slides? Or 1 or 2. So, where you have the shared gymnasium here,
Yes.
we talked initially in our meetings a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about both the gymnasium and pool in the community center and a gymnasium in the elementary school for
Correct.
the needs of the community.
Correct.
So, what's the size differential, or how does that work out in terms of if you share a gymnasium?
We fundamentally would be reducing the school program by 1 gymnasium size, which I don't remember the number off the top of my head, Tina. I don't know if you know it, but we would be, I think the school had a smaller gymnasium, and so we would be reducing the building by that smaller gymnasium size and using the gymnasium as a link between the two buildings, maybe a corridor. The pool would still remain on its own off to the right-hand side as the current building program has. So really the only shared amenity is the gymnasium itself.
Right, but would that reduce the size of the community center as well, because you're not having a full gymnasium in the school, a full gymnasium in the community center, you're...
Combining it into one. That's right. That's right.
So would that make the building smaller? I'm just asking in terms of, you made note of the fact that you have buffer zone issues with the basketball court and tennis courts, and if the building was smaller because you combined the gymnasium, would give you leeway to move those courts out of the...
We could, in theory, move the courts out of the the question really is about the wetland setbacks. These are called buffer zones.
Right.
And there's a 25-foot, a 50-foot, and a 100-foot buffer zone. And we could likely pull the courts out of the 100-foot buffer zone and have some room to work with. The exact location of this building, it could rotate down the page slightly and pull it further away. I think we are showing the build. Let me just see if I can. Yeah, see that? See how it moves a little bit, the building? So that we did pull the building closer and make it a little bit smaller. But we could move those courts a little further. In fact, highly likely get them all out of the buffer zone. Does that help? Of course.
Jeff, you had a question?
Just related to that, how does a shared gymnasium work with a community center that wants to use it all the time? and a school that's not going to be able to share all the time.
Right. I think this is an operational question, and I think that will be dependent on how these two buildings are operated and what the hours are, what the use times are. Is the gymnasium only available after 3 p.m. or is that still after school program? I think there's a number of hourly, daily, weekly use questions that are on the table. And so there's operational use, there's operational cost, there's also first costs of construction. And so we just wanted to make sure that we looked at these things as possible scenarios. And I don't think we can resolve how it would be used here, because I think that's really an internal operational question. So option 2 takes the community center that was up in the top and slides it down to this piece of land that is down closer to Eldridge Parkway and Clayton Circle over in this lower corner. So if I just go back, this is the community center up top of the plan where there's a little more room around it, and this is pulling the building down to this corner of the site. Fire rescue stays where it is, parking, all of those things stay. This works really well for fire rescue. This location works really well. The school is located in the location of similar to option 1. We do take the gym piece, and here's where it gets a little bit confusing. This part of the school now becomes the gym piece. Before, the gym piece was up here, so we switched those two buildings around, fundamentally rotated 180 degrees, and we moved the community center down in this area. Each department has dedicated parking, so we have parking for the fire, parking for school, parking for community center, access all on town-owned land, and here, to your point, the fields are mostly out of the buffer zone. We'd have a little corner in the buffer zone unless we rotated that slightly, and I think that's easy to do to shift that around. Maybe the basketball moves back or some version thereof. So this also works phasing wise. Phase 3 looks like it's hitting the school, but note that the school would go away. The existing school would go away when phase 2 is completed. And so this would be developed into land, and then phase 3 would be developed for the community center at that location. Lots of good pros and cons, or lots of good pros, a few cons. Things that we can review and talk about. Primarily all on town-owned land, which I think is a very big one, and easy to phase all of these pieces together, which has also been a primary concern. Photovoltaics can go any way possible. We're simply showing a circle. Maybe it's bigger. That's not. These are more diagrammatic than anything, just to kind of start the conversation. And note that there is. I didn't say this, but there is a little corridor. The corridor, this sort of corridor that connects all these modules that are spun off that corridor could continue to the community center, and that could be connected to the community center where people don't have to go outside and still have ease of access between the two, and there are ways of managing the access and travel through there for safety of both sides of that coin, with technology, with card swipes, when they turn on, when they turn off, all that kind of stuff. I think there's a number of possibilities there. And then option 2B is very similar, right? You see the 2A has the two separate buildings with a corridor. 2B, we simply combine the gymnasium again and pull the building slightly further up the page. The reason this option 2 became option 2 as opposed to option 1 is because we're a little concerned about the size of this building in relation to the size of these buildings. In fact, there's one study that we had the back of this building facing this way. So the community center was facing inward to the campus, but it seemed like it would be very large in relation to these. And so from thinking about it from sort of a planning board perspective, not having a massive building dwarf the buildings, the smaller. So that was one of our concerns, is trying to balance the scale of relative items. If it's the side of the building, we think we can modulate the scale a little bit, and if we pull it further back, we can certainly modulate the scale of it. So that's just something to think about. Pardon me, as we go forward. But the same question applies. Smaller building, shared gymnasium, connection, operations are all questions that we would have to think about. I think you get the overall picture and story. Pros and cons are pros are very strong. Not that many cons. Photovoltaic panels throughout. So those are the options. We feel that 1A or 1B are very strong candidates. It gets in, it'll start to, I think we're able to project pretty clearly the schedule and cost and commitment to the fire rescue facility, the school and the community center, both cost and schedule are something that we as groups need to work through and think through, and then their operations internally would have impact on whether it's 1A or 1B. But I think any of these four are really strong candidates for the town to consider 1A through 2B. So the next, I'm going to talk about schedule for a minute. So are there any questions on planning? Yes, excuse me.
Sure. Could you just speak again to the option 2? I think you went over the reason you guys put it as 2 was basically the abutters.
I think that's right. I think that, it's harder to read on the synopsis slide, and I can go back if we need to, but the community center seems to make sense to be back in this part of the site. There seems to be a little bit more breathing room in and around that part of the site. And as a campus development, it seemed like the scale of these buildings might be impacted by larger buildings that are getting closer to the property line. And so that's kind of why we went from this being option 1 to this being option 2.
Okay. And thoughts about the advantages of, I'm just looking at the fields, and you have a school on one side, and I have a community center in the middle, and I have kids going to play soccer at recess and going across the road, and there's a community center and traffic going in and out of there. Are all of these things factored in your choice of saying this is a better, or are we just thinking that?
Well, I think that's, I guess,
suited for the property, but not for the use of the property?
Yeah, no,
My
I
question.
think what you're suggesting, and I'll go back to the larger slide to just talk about it, but I think what you're suggesting could be a good candidate, that might nudge, option 2 up a little bit, because what we're talking about is pardon me, I'm going to go quickly to this other larger slide so we can see it this way. If people are leaving what is really the kind of fitness area and going over to the fields, there is some, if these are all roads designed this way, yes, there could be some walking paths. There could be a number of ways of doing it. But from a planning perspective, this seemed to be a logical way to get traffic in and around. Community center traffic is really this side of the road and over to here. School traffic is this side of the road and around. And so technically they'd be, crossing any number, I suppose. But if we had a path that went just across the community center traffic to the fields, that's certainly a consideration.
Okay, I guess my question was a little bit in general. Were those things considered during this?
Yes. Yes, I think
Okay,
they were.
thank you.
Yes. Go ahead.
Sassy?
So I guess my question kind of goes back to a little bit of what Ian's saying too, when last time I spoke, number one, about security. And then just wondering about use of each property. So I'm just thinking, because I used to drop my little people off, how it is at 7:30, how it is at 2, those windows, and then, well, there's the reality of what would go on at the, fire station that's unpredictable. You don't know, obviously, those times are
be sure.
24 hours a day. So that traffic needs to be able to get out in a hurry, get in to, regroup. So there's that area. But then we have our elementary school over here where the little people are busy in the morning. Then you have them busy again, lots of traffic at 2. So how do you, I just think about what it was like just to get in and out during those windows for one facility, let alone having the community center in the back, trying to get people in for, what we see at the middle school when people are doing their morning, morning activities. I'm concerned that there's so much possibility for cars on and all the different, not just the safety of the children, but safety of the people at the community center, safety of the fire and rescue to get out promptly. There's, obviously time, is a big concern if there's 2. So I just wonder about that with 3 pretty significantly busy buildings. Elementary school where you can obviously know their windows where they're busier, but then having activities going on at the community center, how to manage all of that.
I think they're great questions, and I think one of the ways to manage public safety is to get them out of one road. This is pretty wide. There's little green dots represent some kind of trees, and then a road in and or out at both for the elementary school, peeling off to one side for community center. So the idea is that this would be one road, and then it would peel off community and school. I think the added difference that we now have to think about is the possibility of using a new road that is from the easement that comes around the back of the school, and maybe that's a relief valve to be a little bit. While we're adding program to the site, there's no question we're adding program, and we're adding more use and maybe putting more pressure on the site with the community center. We are putting in another valve that should help some flow. It's not as easy access as Eldridge Parkway. It's not as commonly known as Eldridge Parkway yet, but I think it would become another path and another spoke in the wheel. I don't know what the metaphor should be, but it will allow traffic to flow on that side of the road as well. So while we're adding community center pressure, hopefully we're building for 300 kids, but we're providing other paths to get in and out, if that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. I'm not quite understanding the shared field plan, because maybe it's because you've got them both laid out as baseball fields, but how is it that they would both, how would 2 groups be using those fields?
I guess they would operate independently. That's one of the drawbacks. We could pull the fields back into the buffer zone. That goes to the earlier question about, can we work in the buffer zone? Is one going to be a soccer field and one going to be a baseball field? That's some of the pieces that we were kicking around. We're overlapping them because we're trying to keep them out of the buffer zone. Schedule? So the way we understand it, the way we understand the schedule is that the fire rescue station goes for design appropriation now and gets built in 2026, 2027. So that would be phase 1, right? Phase 2, as we understand it, is the elementary school is design as planned for FY 2027 with the possibility of construction 28 to 30. We're in 25 now, right? So we're projecting out at least 5 years here. The community center design maybe FY 31 with construction 32 to 34. Again, a 2-year, I don't know that each one would be a 2-year build, but we're using 18 to 24 months as an overall schedule projection. Does that make sense to everyone? Everyone comfortable there? And so,
Can I just ask a question?
of course.
The schedule by which this is going to happen, to me, is not defined. Basically, the idea of the cost of these projects and when they're going to be able to be slotted and done by the town is something that I haven't seen any studies that would show how the community center would fit in at that point in time. The elementary school is a little more controlled by the fact that there's an existing building that's needing attention, but community center is a total option. And for people that are watching this, I think it is important that we understand that none of this schedule, or at least the community center schedule, hasn't been decided.
And this is a fantastic point. We in order to put together some cost projections, we had to take a stab in the dark at a schedule. We don't know that, it is called Master Plan 2040, and maybe the community center is being built in 2039 and 2040. I had to think for a second there. So I don't know that there is a definitive schedule, and we're not trying to suggest or impose a schedule. We simply had to, in order to put our arms around the possibility of cost projection, start to define some sort of schedule, because construction costs have a dollar value that are kind of known today. And then we're projecting 5% escalation year over year. And so we start to look at that square foot cost and project out to 2032, 2034, and start to come up with a number. It is a crystal ball at this point. I want to be very clear that as we lead into costs, we don't know yet, right? We're projecting because we have to come up with a number to start to answer questions, to start really a conversation in your community to think about how this might happen and when it might happen. But that's part of our charge, is to plan the site, think about a schedule, think about a budget. Those are the tenets of a project, right?
Can I say that in a different way? This is a plan for a design potentially, and this is a potential timeline that lets them cost out what that would be. In no way is this an approved timeline that has even been considered for these projects. This is the very early stage. The CIP, much like we talked about the last couple of weeks, is also just a conceptual plan of when we might be able to do some of these projects. But the big key to what Mef just said is part of when the community decides it wants to pass something at a town meeting. So but in order for these guys to be able to really give us good numbers in a real timeline of build, that's what this is. So we are not approving this specific timeline tonight. We are just talking about what a timeline could look like and what it would cost if we moved forward. So this doesn't mean we've said go on any of these.
Can I do one more thing? The school portion there, the modular sort of school design is, did you say 300 students? Is that what you're?
I was wishfully projecting. I think there's another big discussion in the community that needs to be had, which is the range of. I think there's a discussion of 150 students or 232 students, which is the MSBA guideline. So that has to do with whether the town is going to go and talk to the MSBA and get funding for the school, and what the. There was a discussion about low mod income housing and what the implications of that housing and number of bedrooms might have on school planning. And so there are, what I can speak to you about with some certainty is the fire rescue station today. I can't, there are many uncertainties around the school and community center, from the population that we're going to ultimately design for, from the schedule that it's going to be projected on, from the funding sources or agencies that are used. So I think we know that there's a problem with the existing school. We know that we don't want to invest too much money in that building right now. And so we want to plan for something. But I think there's some uncertainty around exactly what's being planned. This is the beginning of allowing you to focus that conversation within your community, if that helps.
Yeah, just what I was really trying to get at is that a scalable plan?
Yes.
In other words, if the enrollment that we want to build for turns out to be much less, can a couple of those modules be not done today, but be done tomorrow if enrollment demands it?
Yes, I think the answer is yes. I don't think, what I'll say to you is the floor plans you looked at 3 weeks ago were not designed with that intention, but the building as a modular system could be designed with that intention. It's a spine with modules off of it. And that could be, and I'm thinking about plumbing fixture counts to number of students, right? There are requirements that we have to meet per building code. We didn't think the building through in that way, but I think that would be a key part of your discussion as we go into schematic design and start to think about the design of that actual building and who's using which pieces. Is that more, you enough for that, or you?
I'm good for now.
Okay. So, right, so this is, the word projection means that we're projecting, we're not sure, we're assuming a certain amount. Again, what I can say is fire rescue, what I understand is that there's an intent to go for funding now and to build soon. School and community center, unclear when those things might happen. And so with that in mind, as we start to develop costs for things, we're thinking about schedule, we're thinking about when contractors, subcontractors are trying to source electrical equipment, what the pricing they're getting for their electrical switchgear, for their HVAC, for whatever it might be. And so we're thinking about that as we put together a schedule and as we put together a budget. So the schedule on the screen is really for the fire rescue station. And 2025 is the top bar, is the year. This is 2026. This is 2027. The years don't get shorter. We're just counting months differently. In May is when your town meeting would happen, as we understand it. And then this blue bar is schematic design. It's a period where we take the concept that we have now, right? Just remember, all of the plans that we've shown you a few weeks ago are concept plans. We have to really dive in and get to the schematic design. That means that we work with the fire department and the town to refine the plans to get them to where they need to be. We start to talk about diagrams of HVAC systems and diagrams for solar panel systems, but that's all happening in schematic design. At the end of so if we start that in May, in mid-June, we send a set of documents out to a cost estimator. A cost estimator needs a good 2 to 3 weeks to build a cost estimate. So we're showing you numbers tonight. We're going to show you numbers in a few minutes that are projections based on what we know now, but there'll be more detailed cost estimates coming through in schematic design. Once those are approved, design development is where the engineers start really dialing in and getting all the parts. We know the structural system. We know the subgrade. I think in your case, we've got some fill that's we're gonna have to work on. All of that starts happening in design development. That ends up somewhere in October. We check the cost estimate again into November. We know that we're on budget, so we're doing construction documents at the same time, starting to think about where every valve is going to go, the type of light fixture, all that sort of stuff. We're talking to permitting, getting permitting engaged and approved. So by March of next year, basically a year from now, we're putting the project out to bid. And there's a Massachusetts state law, chapter 149, bidding procedure, 149 or 149A. We can talk about what we're going to do. But there's a bidding procedure, and that takes a good 6 or 8 weeks. And so in May of next year, of 2026, we would start construction, which would go on for roughly 18 months, and the building would be finished in July of 2027. That's a schedule for the fire rescue building. That's a viable schedule that I can stand behind today and say, this is the time frame and this is what it would take to get something like this done. I can't give you that schedule for the school, and I can't give you that schedule for the community center because of the unknowns. I know I jumped into the weeds a bit there. There was some detail, so again, I'll pause if there's questions. So then we can start to talk about potential cost projections. I'll just reinforce that projections are into the future. We're not really sure yet. I'll say that a number of times. The numbers for the fire rescue station, I think, can be taken with sincerity. The numbers for the elementary school and community center have degrees of uncertainty because of all the pieces that we talked about. There is something in a project, so people talk about construction dollars. They're talking about what it costs to build walls, all the windows, all the stuff that we see in a building. We like to say that those are the hard costs. The soft costs are, if you took the building and you turned it upside down and you shook it, all these chairs would fall out, right? That's furniture, fixtures, and equipment. All of the chairs would fall out, that's furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And then there's something known as soft costs, and those are professional fees, those are legal fees, those are advertising. There's a whole list, and on the left-hand side, we have legal fees and project management fees. We have some administration expenses by the town. There's a design fee for the architects and engineering team, geotechnical testing, civil engineering, testing services during construction. Someone has to come out and check if the concrete is in fact the concrete that was specified. Those are all soft costs, and those soft costs have a tally that I don't have the exact number right in front of me, but it's roughly $4 million, $4 million and change for soft costs. For hard costs, which is this side over here, we have roughly $36 million for the building, roughly $2 million for site utilities, things like that. So roughly $38 million. And then we have furniture, fixtures, and equipment, FF&E, roughly $285,000. We add a contingency in there, and so we're just about $45 million. It's $44 million, six something. That's known as a total project cost. So it's not just construction cost. It's not just buying furniture. It's also all the other soft pieces that go in there. There's a big note right here. Based on design and build now. If you wait a year, that number is going to go up by at least 5%. At least 5%. Every year you wait, the number gets more expensive. So time is literally money when it comes to these things because of escalations of what light bulbs cost and escalations of what HVAC equipment cost and all sorts of things. I'll just state the question now because the answer is we can't answer it. People at this state say, have you accounted for tariffs? The answer is no. We have no way of knowing that. I have no idea what's coming from Canada, what's coming from Mexico, what's coming from China. I don't have an answer there. So just so you know. So that is the fire rescue station total project cost projection. The other big piece of this equation is that cost projection of $45 million assumes the firefighters are able to stay in their existing facility and work out of that facility, and they don't have to move somewhere else. The way the master plan is designed, we believe that can happen. But if we change the location, we want to replace where they're working in the location that they're working, we then have to design them a temporary fire station, which also has soft cost and hard cost. We didn't do FF&E because FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, because if they were to relocate, they would probably take things with them that they need. We might want to put a little bit of money in there, but we just made it hard and soft cost. Right now, we're tracking that for a temporary building, depending on where they go, we're talking about roughly $11 million just to build the building, or 13.5 as a temporary fire rescue station, which is not money well spent, is what I'll say to you. But we have to ask the question. I'm sure there's lots of questions. I'm not sure where to pause or where to look in the room, but I'm guessing there's a lot of questions.
Yes, but I have
Well,
no,
I'd like to have the board and the school committee have their questions, and then
Okay.
anyone in the public
Terrific.
that might have a question.
Fine.
We can entertain that, so.
I think one of the things that we have to grapple with is the size of the fire station. And if I'm doing my math right, we're estimating this to be about $1,086 a square foot all in, that being the all-in cost.
That's probably about right. I have 870 for construction cost, and I didn't do the math for the all-in, but that sounds right.
But number that I don't see on here is the square footage of the existing fire building. And I don't know if you have that or.
I don't have it with me. I do have it. We do have it because we did the analysis of the building. It's a smaller building for sure. It has a smaller footprint. It's on multiple levels, but the way the fire department and I have talked about the building with program, which I think was done a few times, this is pretty much the size that they've determined they need.
I basically asked that question because we've had some comment at other meetings that in comparison to some of the other new fire stations that have been built on Cape Cod, including Barnstable and Dennis, that this is bigger than all of them.
Well, Dennis, just to be clear, Dennis was a substation replacing another substation, Dennis Fire Station 2, because we did that building and we were just there. And so it has a much lighter load than this building would have for sure. I think if you combine Dennis Station 2 and headquarters, it's probably about similar size to what's here. Just to
Jeff, do you want to, enlighten us a little bit on that, please?
Good afternoon, Jeff Deering, Fire Chief. Just for the current building, it's about 10,500 square feet. And compared to other fire stations across the Cape, I'm happy to go through those numbers. Hyannis is the next closest to us, and our proposed building, and that is 34,000 square feet. And just as part of that, they've already captured an office, day room, and another space to create more bunk space in that station. That station was occupied in 2019. So they're already out of space in that facility. The rest of the stations that have been built locally, Chatham is just about 21,000 square feet. Brewster's 22.5. Both of those chiefs report that those stations are out of space as well. I'm happy to answer more questions about that specifically, but those are the.
No, that's not what I was asking.
one thing.
Well, what are you asking for?
One thing I will say.
Make it smaller.
If we've got people here now that can answer the questions, you have to ask them the question.
I think this might help. One thing I will say is that we did the program, took down all the program requirements, put together conceptual design, and I would argue that the conceptual design is not as efficient as it can be. Right? I happen to know that the lobby in my mind is a lot bigger than it should be, and I think I've mentioned this to the chief and to staff. Schematic design, if I go back to the schedule just real quick, this period is where we will be wrenching the project down and making sure that everything works as efficiently as it's going to work. I guess that's if that helps you. There's a good 8-week, 10-week period here where we're looking at the design very carefully and crunching numbers to make sure that it works. But for the master plan, in a way, we had to think about worst case scenario because we've only got a certain amount of land and a certain amount of roadway and access and safety and all sorts of things to think about.
As Ted alluded to, we did go through a number of programming exercises, both with Galante, but also in the previous studies that looked at the current building and then what are the future needs right now, and but also looking out into the future. So everything that you see in the proposed concept that Galante has developed is really something that we see as a need now or in the future. So we've planned some time into that as far as, are we going to add an ambulance? What's the staffing going to look 3 years, 5 years, 20 years, 50 years from now into that facility? And that's why it got to the number it did, is that we're looking at every single one of those things. We're looking at the training spaces in that building. We don't have training space anymore in the current building. It doesn't exist. We made it offices and bunk spaces. We've added in a medical simulation lab in the new building. That's a trend in our industry that we can't provide. No one on Cape Cod has that facility and a fire station. So that's why that was designed in, at least in the concept, to get to that number.
When looking at each piece of the puzzle, how
Yes.
much land does each area need, including the facility, you know, and not having a temporary site? So you have the existing fire station, the new one, existing elementary school, new one. Can you just give us some?
I can give you rough numbers. Right now, fire occupies this piece of land in and around here, which I think was about 1.2 acres, if that's what the number was, 1.3, somewhere in there, and expanding it back to here makes it more like 3.1. So it does increase more. School, I don't have the exact number, but it was probably in the 3.2 range. And then the new school, if we're calculating parking and area, we're taking over a good portion of the rest of the space. But I would guess that that's in the four acre range. So I don't have the numbers exact for each one. That question was asked about fire, and so that's why I knew that one a little bit more. But I can get you those numbers if that would help. I think I'll go through Gail and get you guys those numbers.
Do you have an idea about the community center, what space that would take?
Basing on what I'm seeing here, it's probably in the 2.5 acre range. Just given that this is roughly 3.1, so this is probably in the 2 to 2.5 acre range, somewhere in there. But again, I'll get you those numbers. We can break it down, fire, community center, elementary school, fields, if that helps.
Yeah, that would help.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Ted, thank you so much. In my mind, we're asking this area to do a lot for us as a town, and you guys have done an incredible job looking at these different options and putting the programming that we asked you to do and to put in here. So, first off, I just want to say thank you, everyone that was involved in this, your time, your efforts. It's awesome. The wooded area at the top of the lot there, I know right now we're jamming fields, and I feel like we're losing some programming space. Fields are an important area where our kids are, out playing. We have soccer and baseball, softball, all these other areas. With that in mind, where the new buildings are projected, we're taking down, woods there. We're taking down, and I think that's good. What are the costs involved with sort of terraforming this whole lot? Has that been looked at? And in the projections of the cost, like, this is not just a flat piece of land. If you've walked it, it's hilly, bumpy, it's all sand. Can we put these massive structures on it and just, it's all going to be fine? Or is the thing going to, I have questions about how much it's going to actually cost to move this earth around it and put a stable foundation underneath all of these buildings and utilize this space. So is that all projected into these costs?
Yeah,
I mean, I see the $2 million note for site development.
That's for fire specifically.
Just for the fire?
That's for fire.
Okay.
I don't, it's a great question.
Yep.
It's a great, and let me just say, every time we come here, we go to the site first and we drive around to remind ourselves how many trees there are, how much land there, how much terraform there is, how much hills and valleys and all those things. I get it. I'm terrified about taking all those trees down, but we have to do it if we're going to develop the land, right? And we have to replant the trees to get it to where we want it to have an equal caliper. I don't know if we'll be able to get an equal caliper tree to tree on this site. We also want to think about photovoltaics, which is not friendly with trees. So I think there's a number of different factors that are interwoven with one another that we'd have to work through as we go into each facility and think about how and when and why each one is done. So I think just know that I'm thinking about that every time we come here, right? This where this area is densely wooded, this area is densely wooded, right next to it, right? There's a lot of trees there, and they're old growth trees. There's a lot of them are invasives. A lot of them, there's all kinds of things that we can talk about when we get a landscape architect involved. But that's something that we'll have to noodle over carefully. I don't think, and I think we ought to think about as a group. I don't think we want to level this site and have just a, level golf course, right? I think keeping texture, context, hills, hillocks, valleys are all part of what I think helps kids play, right? Gives them some gradation and such to work on. So I think there's a number of pieces there. In terms of the stability of the soil, I don't have any concern about that, right? There'll be geotechnical tests. We'll get that all figured out. I do want the fire area as level as possible, right? I got really big vehicles going out really fast and ambulances and such. Buses are moving slower. We want to make this work for them. There's requirements for pitching and grading for making sure that accessibility can happen in all these places. I've got to be able to get a wheelchair from one building to a field, right? So there's some of that stuff will come into play. All of those items, I think there's a site development that's going to come up with all of these items that I don't think we know the costs of yet. And I'm trying to get to that answer for you. I feel that the number of $2 million to develop this site, to take the building down, to develop this building, because I have a better sense of what has to happen there now, we can rely on. I don't know what if building number 3 is here or building number 3 is here, if it's connected, if it's not connected, what the grading is. There's a number of factors, number of uncertainties, and all the parking and piece. So those numbers are a little bit trickier to project. We tried with some projections of site cost in there, but they're trickier because they're so far in the future and with so many uncertainties.
Well, being on the school committee, I mean, if I had a choice over the wooded trees up there or another soccer field and recapturing some of that space for children to play on, I would personally, and this is just me, I'm not speaking for the school committee, but I chop the trees down and put a field in there for the kids to play on. So, and I've seen the community center up there and stuff. So I'm just, in this diagram that we're seeing in some of these options with these overlapping fields and losing, in my mind, I feel like a lot of the outdoor programming space right now that the OES has, I'd like to see some more of that incorporated into the design out here. So instead of 2 overlapping baseball diamonds, that really only one of those can be utilized at one time. Nobody could play a game of soccer out there. Nobody, you know what I mean? While one is being utilized, that's not the case now. So I see that as a detractor right now for me as
I don't,
input.
and I don't have a problem making an option like that of 2C, whatever the number is, and start to, we were thinking more about site sustainability, tree coverage, what planning board might say, what CONSCOM might say, all of those layers are in there, and this is part of the wider discussion that the community will have to have as those things get developed.
Okay, so there's still room for that, because I mean, in my
Absolutely.
mind as a parent and stuff, like, I'm not concerned with, conservation at the moment in this particular area. I'm concerned with conserving the space for the children.
And I think
to play and utilize. So for me, where this detracts from that brings an issue to that. The same thing with some of these options where we see, a playground behind the community center with, sort of limited access from the school in option 1, or crossing over the road to get it just feels And again, and I stated it at the beginning, we're asking this area to do a lot for us, and I completely understand that. So I'm not,
But I want to reiterate something you said. There is room and time for the design to mature and modify, whether that's the site or the building or the parameters around it, parking. None of these are a fait accompli. None of these are decided upon and settled. There's a master plan so that we can organize the land and move in a certain direction with one phase, as I understand it, going forward now. And even that phase will have time for the design of these facilities to mature over the course of the next few months. But this studying, having soccer fields and more soccer fields, less trees, easy peasy. We can certainly do that and accommodate that.
right. And so with this first part of the phasing in there, you're saying that being said and done, that portion being sort of sectioned off there, that sort of, I would call it, the lower right-hand quadrant where the fire station's going to, everything else surrounding there sort of going to be a flexible.
Yes. Flexible to whatever degree the community allows that to be flexible. At some point, like any problem, right? You have to put a stake in the ground and say, this is the way we're moving. But I think this is we see the way of using this land in the most efficient and most effective, and we can talk about whether 3 is here or up here, or whether it's a 2-story school or 1-story school. It seems that the 1-story is favorable, but there's room for that and time for that. Again, for those pieces to mature. That's the benefit of your schedule. In fact, the drawback of your schedule is that it's really hard to guess what the numbers are going to be for construction. But the benefit of your schedule is we can refine those items and answer the questions that you're asking as a parent, as the CONSCOM and there's discussions there that can be had.
Being on the school board, and I'll direct this towards the select board, being on the school board and my concerns for the building writ large right now in its current state and what the needs are, seeing this study, while it's fantastic to see the data and having this laid out, it makes me feel like this is much farther away for the school than it is a near-term solution. While that schedule looks great, that, in 4 or 5 years, we could have a new school on that site. With the amount of work and time and money that's going to go into all of these projects, my fear is just the appetite is not going to be there for our project when it comes time for that. And our project, looking further in this book, and we haven't gone into it, but the numbers are bigger, and the projection is nebulous. And in my mind, that means cost more, and without saying it. And maybe that can all be worked as the plan moves forward, and things can be shrunken down or expanded, whatever it may be. But my main concern being on the school board is to, like we said, put a product out there that's going to work for everybody. And while I am very grateful for all the work that's gone on so far, again, the concern is that, is the town going to be able to pull this off? Is there planning here that's already in place that's going to say, yes, we have a great plan that we're going to help fund these projects? And I haven't heard a lot of that discussion. So maybe it's out there, and I hope that it is. And I know this is part of that, coming up with this, but I'd like to hear more about that aspect of it from the select board at some point in the future.
Question, Beth?
Yeah, just to sort of follow Ian there, one of the hopes, I think, at least from the recreation people in town, has been that the amenities that get put in here will be more accessible to the public during school hours. And I don't know what kind of thought has gone into that in this plan.
Again, the idea of having the building separate like this with number 3 being a standalone building, whether it has a corridor here or not. In option 1, it doesn't have a corridor, and having its own parking and its own dedicated entrance and exit. That building could be occupied at 7:30 in the morning to.
I'm thinking more about the tennis courts, the outdoor.
I see.
The tennis
I see.
courts and the-
Yeah, again, I think all of these are accessible, and that would be a coordination, right? Tennis courts should be accessible anytime during the day. Sports fields, it's a matter of they'll be accessible anytime during the day, but would have to be scheduled with school or not, depending on who, the jurisdiction there of each of these facilities. But the intent was to have them all, sort of around a central core so they could be used at any time. Maybe I might suggest that a strategy. Look, you were looking at a master plan because you weren't sure how to use this land. I think we're developing a master plan that says here are ways to use this land for the pieces of the puzzle that are needed. Maybe one of the things that comes out of this master plan is we've settled the fire station, right? It's been looked at a lot. That goes forward. And maybe the next phase of the master plan is to look at the rest of this and drill down deeper into these questions of use and schedule and access and all of those things and take those pieces a little further, determine that item one, phase one, is settled, but yet still consider some of these other ones. Is that more soccer fields? Is it 150 children? Is it 230 children? What would the planning board think about this building being here at this scale versus being here? What does Conscom think about this? And maybe that's the next layer of this feasibility, of this master planning study. You guys are spending a lot of time thinking about each building in different studies, and I don't want to foist more studies upon you, but I think there's a lot of questions that the community seems to have about some of these items that maybe some objective guidance for each of those might help.
Not sure what that means.
Ian, just briefly in response to your question, I think the select board has a responsibility to the town, as you have a responsibility as school committee members to your constituents, the children, the schools and whatnot. And so I think that we're doing the best we can right now with the master plan to get the fire station started. It's something that has been, I think, consensus in the town is it needs to happen, and we've got to get that going. So with the discussion that goes on from there, the school committee is now going to take the lead on what they want to do with the school, how big a school they want, what their thoughts are on combining it with a community center and not combining it with a community center. I think we can look at the issues about the amount of field space that's available. We can talk about, do we want to talk to the region because we let the middle school use town Eldridge Park for their rec programs or their phys ed programs? Can we have a reciprocal agreement? I mean, there's all these things are out there for the future that can alleviate some of the small questions that in some people's minds are larger than others, field use, trees that you cut down, whatever it might be. But I think, once we make a determination that we're going to go forward with the fire department, the new fire station, and then we can start looking at the hard facts about what comes next, how we can fit it in, what we need. And again, some of the onus shifts to the school committee instead of the select board on determining what it is that is needed and wanted. And then we can, again, together look at how can we accomplish that. But that's, again, a lot of work for you guys to look at in the near future as we start to move forward with developing the whole campus. It's not, I don't think those are questions we can answer right now.
So, Mark, I guess the one question that I would ask is that we've spent a lot of time developing these plans. And I get that you want to make a decision on the fire station, but I want to make sure that there's a commitment to continue on with this plan to address the needs of the school. I just want to make sure that once the fire station is built, that we still need to deal with the school. And I get that we're going to have to do something to generate the votes for people to vote on this at town meeting, right? I mean, I would think that we would need to sort of create some support for the school. What I want to make sure of is that we don't just, address the fire station and then drop this whole plan.
Can I take this? Because
Well, let me just say one thing, though, before you do, Kim. I think that there's been a commitment from the town all along, from the select board, to move this plan forward, to include a community center, because there are people in town that have a, deep interest in something being developed to service all segments of the population. There's a deep interest in continuing to support the elementary school that we have that's one of the best in the country. There's a commitment from the select board to move this forward. I think what I was alluding to is that we're at a point with concrete plan for developing a fire station here. The next point comes, I believe, when the school committee, in your role, starts to make the decisions about what do we want to have for a school. We keep talking about, it's come up here several times tonight, do you want a school for 150? Do you want it for 230? Do you want it modular that you could add stuff to, start small, add to it? Do you want to combine things with the community center, not combine things with the community center? I'm just looking at that as questions that need to be answered by the school committee. That once, you're comfortable with, what your decision might be and what your thoughts are on those things, that again, then we partner with the select board, with the whole town to move those things forward. And so
Okay,
it's not like we're trying to avoid the issue, or we're gonna say, oh, let's build a fire station and the rest of you guys can go pound sand. It's like,
I was just doing a check-in, Mark.
yeah, no, I
That's-
understand.
That's all. I just want to do a check-in.
I hear you. I hear you, Gail.
Wanted, to
Yeah,
hear it.
And I think, there's none of us in this room that don't value, and I've said this in the public many times over, that we have a community here that has always valued education and know the responsibility that the community has to provide the best education possible. This community has always done that. I don't for one second think that support is going to erode away in the near future or the distant future, because without a good education, none of us would have a job that would allow us to sustain our livelihood, sustain our lives here. Education is a key thing, and we all know and understand that. So that's not going away.
Okay,
But,
thank
I
you.
think we're just, we want to get this thing moving. And so I think, as I said, we get to the point where now some of the onus shifts to the school committee to start making these decisions about what works for you, and then how we can go forward from there. So, Kim, you wanted to say something?
I do. So the current capital improvement plan, the CIP, has Campus Plan Phase 2 in it right now. We have the design in FY '27, and then we just checked, we have the 45 million in FY '30 for whatever the second phase is. We haven't even got to the next set of costs for the other two buildings yet. But that is in there, and the board has already endorsed that, and that is part of a plan that we are already moving on. Part of the question has become about timeline and when, and we've had this conversation in here, and I've said it the last couple of public meetings, and I just want to say it again. There is no magic date or time that a building gets passed in a community, right? There's no certain amount of debt dropping off within the next 10 years because of the sewer project that is going to open a door that we compute, and that's the year that the project moves forward. The project moves forward when you have the momentum that you need to bring the project forward that you want. You bring it forward to the board brings it for a community vote, and the community says yes or no. That's how projects get approved. So it's tricky because the costs do escalate 5% a year, and no one wants that number. But I'm confident that within the next couple of years, we're going to bring another vote forward on something. The question is going to be, what is it, right? And that's what has to get done between now and that vote, which is basically which project is going to be next, right? And then is that what the community wants at that time? We don't know. And so we certainly are planning for another phase of the project to be built. I don't think we have enough money in the CIP, but we'll talk about that later. But again, these are hypothetical plans. And one more reminder, because it was brought up earlier in the meeting too. We approve a certain amount to be borrowed for a project. That does not mean that that amount gets applied to the tax rate in that year. You are just approving the authorization for the project in that year. The year that it actually hits the tax rate is the year in which it's actually borrowed and bonded. So just because something is improved, so a couple of weeks ago, you can look, there was a presentation given by our treasurer collector and our assessor about the cost for the fire station at the 45 million, and I believe he said it was about $300. That presentation was already given. You can go back and sort of look, that's in real-time FY '25 numbers. Those numbers will change every year, right? Depending on what we're talking about, they're gonna go up 5%, and then the dollar amount will change every year depending on everything else in the tax rate that year. So there's too many variables to pinpoint one specific date and time. So I know it seems like it's not etched in stone, because it's not. I mean, it really isn't. There are too many. But we are committed to the planning phases, both on the financial side and on the land side. So, let's hope that the community provides the guidance that we need, right, for the next phase of this, or even for this phase of it, right? So we have a lot of steps to get through in the next couple of years. So let's hopefully not mess this up and then answer that question about tariffs that I heard earlier. I don't want to hear that at all. So let's just keep going. That's all I want to add.
Ian?
Can we talk about the impact of construction on phase one? That's right now behind the current station and in that wooded area. That's from the opacity there. I'm saying that's mostly all in the woods. Am I correct? That's
Basically, yes. There will be impact on the access road, and we have to think through how that works as we get into the schematic design phase. But yes.
And at one point, wasn't there a talk about a temporary easement between those two parcels?
We
or
did,
some type
we,
of
we,
construction
we
on
did
one
talk
of the
about the
plans?
possibility of an easement here at one point, but it didn't really work with the layout with keeping the existing building. With allowing this building to stay there as the temporary quarters. It would require building a temporary quarters elsewhere, because we'd be building this building on top of that building. And so it was down the charts pretty quickly because of the expense of doing that.
So we would have construction equipment accessing some part of the schools right away
Yes.
during the construction phase.
Yes. And there, again, within the construction phase, there can be phases, and it can be contractually set with a contractor that maybe this gets built first, and there's a portion of a new road that then leads to the old road, and then eventually those things are tied together. So there's a number of ways to put that together to minimize, but as I said at the beginning, construction's messy. It'll be there.
Michael, you had a question?
Not so much a question, just to Gail's point, and I think it's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. As Kim pretty much explained, we've committed financially by putting in the plan. This is not something we're going to forget. We've committed to the school and the education here, and I think that you've heard that clearly from this board in the past, and I'm glad you're want to reiterate it again. So, I definitely feel this plan should go forward. Whether we do a community center or not, we're going to find out later if that's what the community wants. But I think that it's guaranteed we're going to have an elementary school here. But to Mark's point too, a lot more work needs to be done of strategy of what type of elementary school we're going to need in the future going forward. And I think that comes from you guys to educate us.
Yeah, I understand that. But I thought it was worth repeating.
Absolutely.
that,
Absolutely.
I just want to make it clear.
And, I think one of the other things too, that, because Ian, you brought it up a couple of times in different ways, but no matter what we do and when we do it, as Ted said, construction is messy. And, living through what's going on at the high school, at Nauset High School, I was just there for, the beginning of it. But going up there and moving equipment and stuff for the sailing team and trying to maneuver around through that construction site and what the kids have lived through for the last couple of years, it's like, you know, that's the reality of doing construction, and it's inconvenient, and it can be problematic, but there's no way around it. So, I mean, I think if we just wrap our heads around the fact that as this starts to go forward for the whole development of the campus, it will be disruptive to some of the programs. But you have to stay focused on the fact that we're doing it because what you get for the final result is well worth that year or two of disruption. And just like, you know, we can't let stuff like that slow us down or become, you know, the tail wagging the dog here is, oh my God, we can't do this because it's gonna be too disruptive to the program. Well, if you don't disrupt the program a little bit to get what you need, then the program's not gonna survive. So,
Can I follow
it is
up?
what it is.
Can I just add to that a little bit? I mean, I look at this and I see, you know, you referenced the Nauset High School. This is more, I think, like the tech school, where they're building a new school or a new fire station behind something that's already existing. And yes, there will be noise and there will be things, but I do see it cordoned off. It's a little bit easier than actually, I think, the high school where your kids are going to school while the construction's going on for that same building. This will be separated, but
Yeah.
my 2 cents.
As I
And
think
I
I
just,
said, you're going to
I
make
just
more.
want to mention that the reality is that in 2020, when this all began, when we were looking at, you know, the HVAC system and a new roof and an envelope, I mean, we were probably looking at $4 million for a roof and the envelope of the building, and that's what triggered this whole asset assessment. And so I think that we need to keep in mind that something is going to have to be done. And, you know, at some point, it's going to be, I think we try to minimize the disruption, but it is what it is, you know?
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, we're living, anybody tripping through East Orleans, it
Yeah.
is what it is. you
Yeah,
know?
we're living it, right?
Yeah, you know, to have some short-term pain for long-term gain is, I have no problem with that whatsoever. As a school committee member, I look through the lens of each of these as, does it make our school and education for our children better? And, you know, that's the question. When I see a site design, while I think a community center is great for the community, I look at through the lens of, does it make the kids' education better? When I see, you know, the new design of the school and the modular layout and how it's set up, I think the work and the programming design that went into this makes it, you know, a better physical plant to better educate our children. And the modular design is fantastic to suit our needs of growth or, for the community. When I see, you know, access roads getting tighter and fields going away and, you know, those type of things being impacted, that's where, you know, in a perfect world, if I didn't have to have a community center or a fire station on the land and I could just build another school on the other side of it and wipe the old one out and put new fields, and then it would be great, you know? I understand that's not in the position that we're in, and I'm okay with that, but I'm still looking at each of these projects saying, does it make it better? So, that's the lens that I look at. So, and I don't have any problem doing construction or having some short-term disruptions to programming. That's not the issue. It's the end product better.
Thank you.
Mark, could we potentially ask for the schematic design funds and engineering funds for the school at this year's town meeting?
Warrant's closed.
The warrant's closed?
Yeah, the warrant closed like a month ago, so a little late.
Okay.
Well, do you know what size school you want to build? I mean, that's the other question.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think we're ready for that, but by next
But you have, you know, you think about fall, if that, you know, for some reason if you're at a point where you're ready, there's the fall town meeting as well, so.
Okay, Ted, you want to continue on?
Okay, absolutely.
Past the fire station.
So we talked about the fire rescue station and some of the cost projections there. And so then if we look at the school, we have the same scenario where there are soft costs in this table is all the soft costs. This is the hard costs, and this is the FF&E. And the numbers are very different, as you might imagine, for furniture, fixtures, and equipment for a school building than they are for any of the other facilities. But where we're trending. If we're starting to look a couple of years out, we're looking at $960 a square foot versus $870 a square foot. And the school building, itself is roughly $63 million. The site, we just carried $2 million as a rough projection, not knowing a lot about the site yet. And so we come up with roughly $77 million for a new elementary school. If you want to think about funding for design at some point, you can look to a number like this. I think it's $6.3 million, somewhere in there, as a starting place for design fee for future, for next year or whenever you're thinking about that. We had 2027 to 2030 in there. And I think that one of them is a one-story building, one of them is the two-story building. Not significant changes in the overall numbers. 76 versus 77.5 million. The two-story is a little bit more. The community center, we're projecting further out, 52,000 square feet. We're projecting at just under $1,200 a square foot for 2031 and 2034. And again, I'm going to reiterate that these numbers are somewhat fiction because we don't know what costs are going to be in 2031 or 2034. If I knew that, I would be selling stock futures and not being an architect. And so we're roughly $73 million for the community center. But again, the community center number, the two-story school and the single-story school are really lofty projections because we don't know enough yet. The fire station, I'm comfortable with those numbers.
I'm going to, any questions from the board? We do have more of an agenda for the select board, although the school committee, I think this was their sole item, right, Gail?
What was your question?
The school committee, this was their sole agenda item, was it? Yeah.
Yes.
So before the select board moves on to other things, I want to give anybody in the audience an opportunity that might have a question. We'll do a brief period for questions, so time we can start. Please use the microphone.
Tom Finan. Looking at parking and access, and you might have answered this in Ian's question, but it looks like the parking for the school along the current driveway that comes in from Eldridge Parkway is not taken into account here. And all those cars, I don't know where they go, but they need that parking. So I just want to make that point. And then more germane to the fire rescue facility is that your plan shows the emergency vehicles exiting through a private property onto Eldridge Parkway. And that really is an important piece of this plan, but yet it's not taken into account when you say all the property's owned by the town. So that would have to be negotiated with the landowner, and I don't think the cost of it would move the needle much, but I just want to bring that point up.
No, I don't think there's any private property being used for the egress.
That's owned by the town, that little sliver that goes out to Eldridge Parkway?
It's back in the middle.
We understood that it was.
Oh, well, that's news to me. Well,
I think it would be helpful if we had the map back up on the screen while he's talking, because then you could answer the question about the parking that I'm pretty sure is absorbed into the new driveway, and then the location of the secondary driveway, right, that's also in that space.
So
Right.
just to be clear, currently, this piece of property, the school comes in and exits out of this piece of property. There's a roadway here that goes into the school, and there's parking on that roadway. We understand that this spit of land is town-owned land, and that the parking that's on that land would be absorbed into all the other parking that we're considering on site. And so emergency vehicles would come out and go along here and out to Eldridge Parkway, but on town-owned land, and the school would use the other side of that town-owned land. So fundamentally, that row of trees, those 2 rows of trees, that's where the road is now, and we're providing 2 new roads instead of that one on that site. And then this is the existing
got that.
pathway that gets used, so I don't- that answers the question.
Okay, it does. It looked like it needed a new easement, so that's, check that one off the list.
Wait, just to clarify, the parking counts have been included though in the top 2,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
That's the other one.
But during construction of the fire rescue facility, it looks like it's gone. Maybe not.
Yes, yeah. So the question's a very good one. We have to do an interim plan. Once we confirm that this, in fact, one of these is the plans that we're going to do, there will need to be an interim plan which allows for parking for the school to be developed on site in some manner that would account for the displaced parking that's along that roadway. So there is an interim plan that would need to be done.
Got it.
It's like having a debate right next to one another.
Okay, next thing is the schedule. And looking back at how we progressed with the police station many years ago, you show the annual town meeting approving on May 12th, then the schematic design by June 17th, then the cost estimates by June 30th. And does that schedule allow time for the RFQs for an owner's project manager and a design firm to be issued and advertised, and the interview and selection process to be carried out? It looks like it's a very tight schedule there.
So what I'll say is that that schedule was built on us continuing the design as the design firm, and during schematic design, an OPM could be hired and brought into the picture. That may not be the town's wishes, but that's how we put it together.
Okay. The next thing is, on one of your charts on the cost, you show $25,000 for demolition of buildings. I would assume that means the old fire station. And I mentioned before in this topic that a house in Wellfleet, which was falling into the ocean, was advertised as costing $1 million to take down, and $25,000 to take down this municipal building, and it just doesn't seem like a realistic number. Is there something I'm missing there? And you also have land clearing and $2 million for site development. I don't know if all of that is wrapped together, or?
So I can't speak to the house in Wellfleet and $2 million worth of demolition, $1 million worth of demolition, but we have taken buildings down of this ilk and this size in that price range. So yes, the $25,000 I'm comfortable with. It depends on how far below grade we go, and there's a number of questions there. The $2 million is really the site development that's sort of on the higher side, because we have some soil we're gonna have to import and fill and level and such, to Ian's earlier point, getting the topography to work. And so that $2 million was a projection based on that.
Okay, got it. Thank you for going into a temporary facility to show that it really is expensive, and you're faced with where do you put it? Where do you put this temporary facility? So you made the point that that really needs to be a non-starter in maintaining the current building. And lastly, you show the 15-foot easement out to Route 6A. Is that where you would envision connecting this into the town sewer system out on 6A through there? Now, you also show it as two-way traffic. When I looked at it, it said 15 feet. So I went out and measured the street in front of my house, and it's 19 feet wide. And when the UPS vehicle comes down that street, you can barely squeeze by with a car on it. So 15 feet for two-way traffic just does not seem to be workable. One-way would work, and also it's got to be considered that you're going out to a very, very busy state highway there. So just a comment on that just 15 feet didn't seem to work for me. So thank you for indulging me.
No, that's great.
Next speaker.
Thank you.
I was just wondering if you,
Could you give your name, please?
oh, I'm Emily Miller, and I was wondering if it was considered to have the building number 3, community center, where those baseball fields, and like, why aren't you using that space up there for buildings? Because, does the community center have to be so close to the school? And I'm just wondering why you decided to put it all over here instead of using that.
So this is a version of the community center up top.
And did you consider putting it where the baseball fields are? I'm just wondering why, and then not having kids crossing roads and stuff to go to the fields and.
Yeah, I think we were keeping the community center close to to the school building, for program access and connectivity if that were to happen.
Okay.
I think we looked at putting it over here, and I can't remember why we dismissed that. There were 7 or 8 different studies done, some that never saw the light of day. But I think it wasn't working over there for some reason. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was just distance between these two buildings. I think the community center was seen as somehow an adjunct to this building, I think, overall.
Because I guess I just want to register the comment that I think it seems really undesirable to have the community center right next to the elementary school. I don't know if that's like popular view or not, but like, how could you ever know who was hanging around the school or the playgrounds, like in between the community center and the school, and who's coming and going, and that just seems like an odd choice to me, but just a thought.
Ted, I give you credit. It's not an easy lot to do this.
Thank you.
Amen. Second that.
Ken Heritage, I've been here before.
We recognize you.
Yeah, thank you.
Look familiar.
Yeah. I want to bring up a couple of things that didn't come up today, but came up when we went around this 2.5 years ago. One of the things that the school committee felt very, very strongly on was putting any construction vehicles that close to the school kids and having any pile driving going on when there was school in session. And we went too far as to discuss the fact that we would have to have pile driving, which I would suspect, and Tom maybe you would agree and maybe you wouldn't, but is going to be required behind the new fire station before you construct it. That would have to be done when the school's out. And then if it's not finished, you stop, let school come in again, and then you start again 3 or 4 months later. So I think that has to be discussed so that the town is okay with it, if the school committee is okay with it, so that we don't get down the road a little way and then there's almost a veto. Oh, we don't like that. We can't have that. So I think that has to be resolved. I think going back to that whole access down that road clearly is going to be a problem. And so I want you to just think about that a little more. Going through some things that Tom brought up, $25,000 to demolish the existing fire station. Does that include the asbestos abatement?
I don't think we have asbestos abatement in that.
was in your
that-
first report.
No, I don't think we have it in the cost
Oh, you
estimate
don't
as a
have the
number. Yes,
asbestos. So that could be another 100,000, right?
That's a lot of asbestos. I don't think it's that much, but I think there
agree
is some
it's
in
not,
there.
but
Yeah, yeah,
it's an
yeah.
expensive thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Can't even read my own writing. The sewer system, is that just gravity or are we planning on pumps? And are they included in the price?
So I don't know about the sewer system. We're not part of that design. I would imagine it's going to be a combination of pumps and or gravity. We are not including that system in the price because we don't know when that's going to happen. There's enough money in that price to deal with sewer connections. I don't know about the wider town sewer system, I guess is what I'm
We
saying.
have this is a loan sewer connection.
To be sure, but I don't know enough about that sewer connection.
I think we should have some idea that that cost is fully included, and that if we have to have lift pumps,
Well, what I'll say to you is
they
that,
would have to, what's the price?
totally agree. I would say that a sewer system within 20 feet of this building, a connection to a sewer or septic is in the number. But I don't know when the sewer project is being implemented and how that gets to this facility.
Well, if the sewer project isn't being implemented to the school.
So we have the number covered for the
For 20
fire.
feet.
Yes,
Bridge
yes,
Parkway,
for
it's
fire,
14.
yes.
Connecting to what? So we need to then find out from RBL or somebody how much to put in a lift system and all that, if the elevation requires it, and the whole sewer system out to 6A.
Well, this Eldridge Parkway isn't until phase 14, so that's way down the road, and I don't think we want to get the school hung up, or the fire station hung up, or the community center hung up on that right now until we determine at what point a sewer
What are you
connection
gonna
may
do?
be necessary.
What are we gonna do with the sewer?
Given the $45 million number, we can get a sewer system for the fire station just as it is. That, just as it is not connecting to the town-wide sewer because we don't know enough about that project.
Okay. Do you plan on a LEED certified building? And is that included?
It is included, we didn't specifically talk about whether
Okay.
it's
Kim, I know you don't like this, but the Trump steel price will be 15% more leased than it is now.
Okay.
If the tariffs don't go away, steel is up 15%, period. And so are a lot of other things that would go into such a building. So I think that has to be considered when we think of 5%. Because all the wiring, you think of all the copper, all the aluminum, and everything else that goes in there, that normally would come from Canada or some such place, we may be in trouble with that. Demolition, I covered. By the way, the existing building was 11,500 square feet. So we're now looking at a building that is 3.5 times, or almost 4 times that size. To me, I just don't understand it. We have included in the only sketch I've seen, 12 single bedrooms. The US Navy sleeps 6 to a room on board a ship. Most hotel rooms, 90% of them, sleep at least 2 people. So, I mean, there are, as Ted said, things that would be slimmed out when we get there. But 2.5 years ago, or when that little time back, we all agreed, including the chief, that 36,000 was okay. So we've now gone up 10% in size. I can understand us worrying about what the future may bring, but the future may not bring that. And if, as I've said many times now, if we don't get this right, this may not pass the meeting and we'll be back to where we started again. So I just ask that this all be looked at before the warrant gets read aloud. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Anyone else from the room for public comment?
Hi, my name's Cheryl Kadir. Do I say where I live?
You live in Orleans.
I do.
Yes.
Excellent. So I wanted to go back to, the topic is fire and rescue question, and the select board asked about square footage, about the size of the fire and rescue. And then I heard the chief talk about the simulation room and how there isn't a simulation room in any of the other ones that would be compared to. So I wanted to ask the architect, do you have, or can you give us the square footage of this education area, the lab, the simulation room, that no one else has, that would be a want? Thanks.
Can I take this before we go? Because I feel like this is going to be a topic moving forward towards the meeting. If the question is going to be about which pieces of the project we can remove because they cost X to make the number lower, then we would like the opportunity to look at that first and put together solutions related to that and consider them as add-alts moving forward. So if a bay is 1,000 square feet, and then we can quantify what that number is, and we do that as an add-alt, if we are committed to the $45 million number, that would be a better way to do it than rather than picking apart each part of the project and deciding whether it's worth it or not. At this moment in time, it's our intent to move forward with the station as designed as needed by the chief, but we will certainly look at the individual costs related to the different sections and see if we have to consider the pieces, but we would like the opportunity to do that list.
My question, just so, that's an assumption. That's not my intention.
No, I think
And I don't want
collectively.
it to go that way. I should say I'm a nurse. I'm all about education, safety, and simulation. I just thought that was the biggest difference, because when you asked the question about the square footage, and I heard the chief say no one else has one of these simulation rooms, that just seemed like an important differentiation.
It is, definitely. But I mean, that could be one, but another one could be, do we need another bay right now, right? These are the types of questions that we have to be prepared to sort of answer and justify as we make our way to town meeting. So we can let the chief talk about it if he wants to, if he doesn't want to.
The training and simulation and some peripheral spaces are roughly 2,000 square feet overall. So it's important space, especially as the parent of an ambulance driver, EMT, who needs training a lot. And when I realized that 20-year-olds are the ones driving ambulances and pulling people off the road, I started to drive a lot slower. So we want, I think, a training room and simulation room would be critical, especially on the Cape.
Is specifically related to the training spaces and the medical simulation lab. All of the trends in our industry point towards medical simulation being a key educational component for EMTs and paramedics going forward. It's a standard throughout many medical schools. In paramedic training, they often have medical simulation labs. But as far as a fixed facility, there isn't one on Cape Cod. Even at Cape Cod Community College, which has a premier paramedic program, they do not have a dedicated simulation lab. Do I see them in the Boston hospitals? Yes. I see them at the facilities that train paramedics and EMTs off Cape. And we really thought this was an opportunity to first and foremost train our people to the highest level here in Orleans, not having to send them out. But we also see it as an opportunity to network with our neighbors and have it as a facility that could potentially be used regionally. But ultimately, the goal of that room is to train our staff and make sure that they're the best that they can be and have those tools right here and not have to send them anywhere. And just furthermore, we were tasked with building a building that would put us into the future and make us a premier organization. So that's what you see when you look at this building, is a premier facility for and premier, when I say premier, is not top end, it's got all the things that we need to be the best we can.
Thank you, Jeff. So David, did you have a question or comment?
I think Katie.
Dave Abel, FinCom. Just a couple quick questions. I think you might have answered it, though. I had a question. I think we have the specialized energy code coming?
Yes.
So you're doing lead, you covered, okay. And the solar is also included? Okay, great. And does the site present any concerns for you in terms of construction and cost and in fact, the close proximity? In other words, wasn't quite clear on whether you were positive you don't need a temporary, given the location of the construction site?
No, let me be clear, I'm positive we don't need a temporary facility if we keep the folks in the facility that they have now. It will not be without struggle and a little bit of challenge to the fire department and to the contractor, but I think it's the contractor should have enough space. There can be there's clear division between a construction site and anything on the periphery, and we don't need a temporary facility for that. I think we've got to relocate a generator, we've got a water supply to deal with. There's a couple of things that we have to work on, the latter of which is harder, but I think we're fine.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yes.
And I think the last question, and I'm not a designer, so it just strikes me it's a little bit tight, given the location. So you've got And I don't know, you guys will know better, but you've got conservation with tennis courts. It looks like you may not be able to have those if you're that close to the buffer. And so along those lines, I think the RFP asked for consideration of adjacent sites as to whether that would offer benefit or not. And I'm just curious what your analysis of that was. Thank you.
Our analysis was we were told to stay within the confines of the site.
So there was one.
Correct.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I'm Katie Cole. I have 4 kids in the district, 3 at OES, and I just wanted to, I have a comment and a question. So, Michael, thank you for speaking to Gail's comment about your commitment for Phase 2 to be a school building, because with all due respect, Kim, all I heard was that there was going to be Phase 2, so I appreciate you pointing that out. Second, my question is, to you, thank you. For the schedule, can you just talk a little bit about, you spoke about the fire schedule. Can you just talk a little bit, can we go back to that slide, and just where it would start to interfere with the school? I know there will be construction happening at the same time, so there will be a lot of things happening, but just where things will start to move over and when.
I see. Okay. So, what am I doing? What are you pointing to? Oh. I think I can do it here, right? Yeah. So right now, just to be clear, there's a road that comes in right here, and there's parking off of that road. And that's the current road that's used for the school currently. And so one of the early steps would be to build a road in for the fire group, as well as likely using that road initially for construction traffic, and move the school road over, and that would happen early on in the schedule of the construction schedule. So so pardon me while I fly through these slides and drive everybody crazy. So somewhere in the July, August timeframe of 2026, that is, which I guess is not school time, that road would be changed. And so that would allow contractors access to the site on the right side of the fence, and build a roadway in for the school on the left side of the fence. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but just clarifying that. So would then, very early on, those parking spots on the left would be
Yeah,
removed?
the parking spots on the left would be removed, and we would have to come up with a plan to augment them somewhere on site, if only as temporary spaces before the rest of it got built. That's something we have to work out. I don't think we've worked out that phasing yet. Think about it, contractors are gonna have trucks, and they're gonna have a lot of parking, and they get steel deliveries and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a laydown area that contractors need, but there's also a real need for the school to use their parking and have parents and teachers and such, and keep everybody safe. So that we haven't worked out that phase plan yet, is what I'll say.
Okay. And then just, but that's the only part where you see that it's like infringing on the school property?
Immediately, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But also
You
keep
could-
in mind that during July and August, there's also rec also uses the OES building, as well as after-school program through June. I know, so
Good
it's
point.
more, there's
Good-
still
good point.
traffic
Yep,
all day long,
yep.
every month of the year.
The question. Ted, can I ask you a question about the easement road? I think Tom said it's 2 ways, 15 feet. Is that designed, that road out to 6A as sorry.
We did not specifically say two-way.
Okay.
That's a conversation that we need to have, and
Because I would much prefer one way, but also something that includes, and I'm sure this is part of a later design part, but walking paths.
yes,
from
all of those things can be
Covering the
considered in there.
whole
That's
site
right.
from one end to the other, all the way from 6A, all the way through the lot. And I just want to say, I understand the comment about moving the community center further out, but ball fields are critically important to the future of this whole space. And so we're not picking favorites, but I do like the one that's the community center closer to Eldridge Park, only because I think that gives us more potential in terms of development of future sites related to ball fields and other pieces and walkable space.
No, I think one of the steps that we should take as a we're calling this a wrap up, but I do think that we should give you an option that is a version of 2B, or to A, either one, but that lays fields up in this area to start to look at the possibility of a number of fields, because I don't think, the consideration of using soccer and baseball at the same time was given. So I think that's something that we should respond with.
And my only other comment was, if that's true, and we do get to put more fields out there, you'll need way more than 60 spots for, I mean, just imagine multiple games at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm sure all of us right here have been in that scenario at any school we try to visit. I know we could use the school parking, but there's still overlap there. So I wonder if there's a way, and I'm thinking about Firebird games, and I know it's kind of far too, but if there's a potential area to identify as sort of overflow parking, even if it's not fully designed.
Parking
Full
stackers.
parking, yeah,
We
something that.
use parking stackers for that.
Something, yeah, something, but even if it's
Yeah.
gravel to
No,
the
I think that-
side, you know what I
right.
mean?
No, that makes
Part of
sense.
an auxiliary space for parking for overflow.
Spoken like a true mother.
Can I ask one question?
Of course, Gail.
So where the community center is right now, somebody brought up the community center where the field is, all right? And moving, the school could move down more, which would create, I'm just wondering if it would create more room for 2 fields if the community center was where that current field is now.
If the community center was on this side
Right.
of that area, would that create room for more fields up here or down here is the question?
No, if the school then moved,
I see, the school slot, we can study that, Gail. I'm not certain about that. I'd have to,
it was,
Could you also study flipping the school over to where the fields are, and then it would split it into 3 quadrants, where you would have the fire station, and then you would have the community center, and that would almost create a buffer that, as Emily pointed out, create a safety buffer between the school and
yeah, I think we
the
looked
other
at putting
two,
the school.
I know, I would
yeah,
love to
we
know
looked
why
at
that
putting the
doesn't
school
work.
over here, and it didn't work for a couple of reasons. I think it didn't fit in the.
Because like
the
I was
layout
at the
as
high
well.
school on Saturday, and there's a sign up there that says campus is off limits during school hours. And I think we owe our kids that amount of safety as they're giving it to the high school. And smushing a community center up against an elementary school is not creating a safe space for elementary school children, especially you're there 5 to 11 or 10. Like this, we need to make as safe an area for this need of an elementary school versus the want of a community center.
Okay.
All right, other comments from the board? School committee? Public? Okay, so I think,
can I just adjourn my meeting then?
yeah, absolutely, if that's what you want to do.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. School committee members, all those in favor of adjourning the meeting? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.